So welcome back to my channel where we talk about real estate investing, personal growth, personal finance, and entrepreneurship. So today's topic, I'm going to talk about red flags you have to look out for when screening tenants. It's going to be a good video, so stay tuned for the topic. But before I get to the topic, you know what to do. Make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I'll be right back with the topic. If you're a landlord, finding that tenant is the most important step you will take as a landlord. Having a great tenant can do wonders for your real estate business, and having a bad tenant can essentially wipe out any profits and cost you a lot of money and a lot of headaches if you have a bad tenant in your property. So I'm going to talk about some of the red flags you have to look out for that may indicate a tenant is a bad tenant and a tenant you should avoid dealing with. A great tenant can do wonders for your real estate business, and a bad tenant can be detrimental to your real estate business. It can cost you a lot of money, cause you a lot of headaches, and they'll be very unpleasant to deal with. So if you're a landlord and you ever plan on selecting a tenant, you will have to go through a screening process in order to find out which tenant is best for you. It doesn't matter what neighborhood you live in. You can live in the very best neighborhoods, but you have to make sure you screen your tenants, because there are a lot of professional tenants out there that know how to trick landlords and know exactly what to say to reel you in and get you to select them. But today I'm going to talk about red flags you should look out for when screening tenants, and these are big no-nos and will let you know not to select these tenants. So I typically rent to Section 8 tenants, so I'm going to talk about red flags you should look out for when renting to Section 8 tenants. But this can apply to anybody. This can apply to market rate tenants as well. So red flag number one is if a tenant has an eviction within their rental history. I tend to not deal with tenants who've had evictions because I know as a landlord, evictions are a last resort for a landlord. They're very timely, very costly, and traumatic to both the landlord and the tenant. From my experience, I would say the number one reason individuals are evicted is because they do not pay their rent, or they've caused so much damage to the property that the landlord no longer wants to deal with them. So I do not want to rent to tenants who had an eviction, because that tells me that they've been so disruptive to their prior landlord that they felt the need to proceed with an eviction. So my red flag number one is if a tenant has an eviction within their rental history. So red flag number two is when you show your property to a prospective tenant and they're continually complaining during the whole house tour. This can be very frustrating as a landlord. My properties are high quality properties. They have hardwood floors, in-unit washer dryers, stainless steel appliances, freshly painted. So these are properties that typically have been completely renovated. So it can become very frustrating when a tenant who you haven't even selected is already making requests on things you need to change in order to get them in your property. That's a big red flag to me. You do not want a tenant within your property that you cannot see. This is because they're essentially showing you they're going to be tenants that are going to be difficult to deal with. They're going to constantly ask you to do things. They're going to ask you to change things, make many maintenance requests. And that's going to cost you a lot of time and a lot of money as a landlord. And you do not want to deal with that in your rental business. So my red flag number two is individuals that complain continuously throughout the showing process. I believe it's okay to be inquisitive during the showing process, ask questions, and if a property really is damaged and things do need to be repaired, It's fair to ask a landlord, are you going to repair this if I do move into your property? But when you're telling landlords you need to put a bigger tub in the bathroom, or I need a bigger stove to cook for my whole family, that's that's not something you personally want to hear as a landlord, and that's a big red flag for me. I ask tenants a long list of questions about their employment history, past landlord, past housing histories, their income. And if an individual is lying during any part of that process, it's a red flag to me, and I will not accept that tenant. Because if that individual is trustworthy during that process, they're going to be an untrustworthy tenant to deal with when they are your tenant. I value long-term tenants. Tenants that stay for a lifetime, 20 plus years, that's my goal. In order to accomplish this long-term relationship, it has to be a partnership between you and the tenant. So for any partnership to work, friendship, marriage, landlord-tenant relationship, there has to be honesty that exists between the two parties. And I do not want a tenant that's untrustworthy. Professional tenants will lie to you about a lot of things, anything that you could imagine. They'll lie about their employment history. They'll lie about how much money they make. They'll lie about who even their past landlord with. They'll give you the phone number of their friend, and of course this friend will say a whole bunch of good things about them when you call them, but that's not their actual landlord. That's just someone they know, who they knew when you called. They'll say good things about them. So you have to be very careful. And there's this big thing going around on the internet that I fell victim to when screening tenants a couple of times, but I've learned my lesson. There's prospective tenants that will create fake pay stubs. You could they just go online, say they work at XYZ company, and say they're making XYZ income, and print out that fake pay stub and give it to you as a landlord. But it's very important that you verify their income, their actual employer, and have that employer send you their income, because there's professional tenants out there that know every trick of the book. But it's important as a landlord that you do not fall victim to this. So it's important you watch out for this red flag, which is untrustworthy tenant. The next red flag that's a big no-no for me as a landlord is if an individual has an alarming criminal history. So typically when you do the background check, you'll get a report back indicating if an individual has any prior charges. So big no-nos for me are domestic violence. Landlord, this is alarming because if you have an alarming criminal history, it'll be very difficult for you to get a job, because just like me as a landlord, this is a red flag for an employer, and they're very unlikely to hire you. So how are they going to pay your rent if they can't even get a job? So having an alarming criminal history is a big no-no for me, and I tend to pass on tenants with alarming criminal history. This next red flag is more Section 8 specific. So within the Section 8 program, individuals that are voucher holders, which are typically disabled individuals, single parents with multiple kids, or elderly individuals. So most people I come across that have vouchers are single mothers with multiple kids. So a big red flag for me is lying about how many people are on your voucher, as well as how many people will be living in the property. So typically, like I said, individuals that have these vouchers are single parents, usually single mothers with multiple kids. If they show up to the house with a male figure, that individual will likely be living in the home. 9 times out of 10, it is their romantic partner, and that person is going to be living in the house. A lot of single mothers with vouchers will not say they have boyfriends to the housing authority, because that may take away their vouchers, because the Section 8 programs deems individuals who are single parents, specifically women with multiple kids, as high priority for Section 8 vouchers, and they're more likely to get issued a voucher if there's a single parent. So lying about the amount of people on your voucher is a big red flag to me, and it goes hand in hand with this untrustworthy red flag that I mentioned earlier. The next red flag I'm going to talk about is if I call your prior landlord and he has many negative things to say about you. That's a big red flag to me, and it's very unlikely that I'm going to take you as a tenant. I know there's always two sides to the story, the tenant side, the landlord side, and the truth. But if a landlord has many negative things to say about you, I personally do not want to deal with that tenant and will not regard them to live in my property, because I do not want to deal with those tenants as a landlord. I do not want to inherit any headache tenants. So I prefer tenants who landlords had no problems with, because hopefully when that tenant inhabits my property, they'll be also giving me no problems. I know there's many landlords that are low quality landlords and put their tenants through hell. So I can understand why a tenant would be so disgruntled when talking about their landlord, because a lot of landlords are very bad landlords out here. So I do take that into account when considering what their prior landlord's going to say. And the reason a lot of tenants do move is because they have very poor landlords who are not maintaining the property, who are not pleasant to deal with, and do not take great care of their tenants. The last red flag I'm going to be talking about is if a tenant is moving frequently. That is a big red flag to me. Like I mentioned before, I'm looking for long-term, lifelong tenants that are going to stay 15 plus years in my property. So if a tenant's moving from place to place every year, I'm less inclined to take that tenant. I do understand many tenants have just not found a great home for them, and with Section 8, their options are limited. But as a landlord, if someone is moving every year, that tells me this is an individual that doesn't like to stay at their properties for a long time. And as a landlord, turnover, which is when one tenant moves out and another tenant moves in, is the most expensive cost you will deal with as a landlord. Turnover is more expensive than most of the maintenance that you'll have to deal with on a yearly basis, because when you have turnover, you have to prepare that unit for the next tenant, which is painting that unit, repairing any repairs that need to be done, and then you have to advertise that unit, and then you have to find a new tenant to live in that property and go through that whole screening process again. And with Section 8, the screening process is extensive, and the pathway that you have to go through in order to get a tenant inside your property is very long. It can take 1 to 2 months just to get a tenant that you want within your property. You're losing about 2 to 4 months of rental income, and if most areas rent is expensive, so if you're charging anywhere from $2,000 to $4,000 of rent, that can cost you quite a bit of money, thousands of dollars. That's wiping out all the rental profit that you probably had for that entire year and can put you at a loss, and that can be very frustrating. So I want tenants that are less likely to move out. So a tenant that's moving from place to place every year is a red flag to me, and I'm less inclined to take that tenant. But it may be the case that this tenant just hasn't found the place to live in yet. He just haven't found that long-term place to call home. So I do take that into account, but for the most part, it is a red flag when a tenant is moving from place to place year to year, because I am looking for long-term tenants and I want to minimize the amount of turnover that I'm having in my properties. So that's a wrap on my video on the red flags you should look out for when screening tenants. If you like this video, you know what to do. Make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a comment. And I'll be back again with another video very soon. If you know anybody that will benefit from my content, you know what to do. Make sure you tell a friend, to tell a friend, to tell a friend, to tell a friend. The Dr. Investor is out.